So now that we know how to construct a vector, what we should now learn is how to use the member functions of the vector class to perform operations on our vectors. So the first member function that we'll learn is called pushback. This allows us to add elements to the end of a vector. And the reason that it's called pushback is because when you give it an element to add, it's adding it to the very back of the vector, to the very end of the vector. So if I have our vector of fruits to represent my list of favorite fruit, what I can do is use dot notation to call pushback and add each fruit individually. So with dot notation, you take the variable name, which in this case fruits, you follow it by the dot or a period, and that dot allows us to access the member functions of that vector. So we're going to call pushback, and then within the parentheses, we get to pass in the parameter that it accepts. So pushback accepts the data type of all the elements within that vector. So in this case, we can add a string to our vector of strings. So I can specify my number one favorite fruit, pineapple, and add it to the very end of my fruits vector. And then after that, I can add my next favorite fruit, and that goes after pineapple. And then I can keep on using dot notation to call the pushback member function to add all of my favorite fruit into this vector. So how we can visualize this is like this. So indexing is this idea in computer science that essentially tells us the location of an element within a sequence. So the index tells us where in our vector a given element is. And widely used throughout computer science across many different programming languages is this idea of zero indexing, which is essentially just a system of numbering that starts at 0. So the very first element in this vector is at index 0, or the 0th index. So we can use this idea of zero indexing to access into elements of our vector. So if I wanted to get a single fruit within this vector at a particular index, we can use the member function called at. So the syntax looks like this. We take the vector that we want to get the element from, we follow it by a dot, and then the at member function, and then pass in as a parameter the index. So in this case, we know with zero indexing, the very first element is at index 0, so this would return pineapple. Same thing for if I wanted to get the very last element, I would get fruits.at and then pass in the last index in this vector, which is 3, and at the third index, we would get mango. And the last member function that we'll cover is called size. And what the size member function does is it tells us the total number of elements that we have in the vector. Again, we'll use dot notation to make a call to the size function, and it doesn't take in any parameters. So the size of the fruits vector is 4 because we have 4 elements within it.